Hey guys, welcome to another video on this series on Python. So today I'm going to talk about a library inbuilt in Python, which is collections and excuse me, the data type it contains. So Python. So right now I have opened the documentation for the collections library, and it contains certain useful data types, and I will talk about those. So there are like these data types that are there, but the most useful ones are defaultdict, counter, and deque. So I will go over each one of them, but there's also another one, ordered dict, which I'm not going to cover because it's not so useful anymore. Basically, um, this is like a dictionary which remembers the order in which entries are added, but starting from Python 3.9, this is not so useful anymore because even a regular dictionary remembers that. So I'm going to not talk about it, I'll just talk about the other data types. So let's begin. Okay, so let me just arrange my screen so that it's visible. Okay, great. All right, so first things first, let's import everything we need. So it's in the collections library. So we import the default dict, we import the deque, and we import the counter. Okay, so what does a default dict do? So suppose you have a dictionary. Let's say this is my basic dictionary, which is empty for now. And then I try to access the first element. So say I try to access this key 1. Now this will throw out an error because we haven't assigned this key, right? So let's try that out. And yes, we get a key error because this key hasn't been assigned. But there are instances when you are performing some task where you want all the unassigned keys to have some default value. That is where you would use default dict. So basically, default dict is like a regular dict, but all the unassigned keys get a default value. So whenever you try to call some key which is not present in that dictionary, it will give a default value. So let me show you how that's done. So now I just call default dict and I specify the data type. So int specifies that all the values that I will call will have an int, all the keys that I will call will have an integer value 0. So, and you can obviously play around with it. So if I go back to this documentation of default dict, you can of course play around with different parameters that it has. So you can set it to be set, list, and all sorts of other things. But I'm not going into details of that. But just just to give you an overview of how this works. So now I have test to be a default dict. It's empty. And then so let me just print that out as well, just to show you that it's empty. And then I will try to access the first the element with key 1. Now when I run it, you see the first output is that default dict, it's empty. But then when I try to access the first key, it gives me a default value 0 because um, that's what a default dict does. Okay, so it's useful so it's useful whenever you don't want to initialize keys to a default value, so you just use a default dict for that case. All right, so that's default dict. Um, Another one is deque. So basically, let me again pull up the documentation. Um, right, so a deque is basically a generalization of stacks and queue, and it's basically a double-ended queue, and that's what the short form is for. So what you can do, you can insert elements on both sides. You can insert from left and from the right side, and also you can pop elements from the left and right. So now an immediate question is, um, this looks pretty similar to a list, and list can do exactly the same thing. So why do we need a deque? And the reason is that um, So whenever you want to do fast operations, that's when you use um, a deque, because so for popping out, it's order one operation, and for list, it's order n for popping out. So that's why a deque is used in situations where performance is a key criteria. So let me show you how we would go about using a deque. So let's create a simple deque and let's fill in some elements. So let's say A, B, C, and say D. So that's my deque. And what I'm going to do is I will first pop from right and then I'll pop from left. So great. So the first thing should output D and the second thing should output A. So let's try that out. And it so I got D and I did not get A. So let's see what's the issue there. Oh, I realize it. It's these curly braces, which made it a dictionary. It's it's like a list, so I need to um, give square brackets. Now let me try that. So yeah, so first it popped out D and then it popped out A. So that's what a deque is. It's just whenever you want to use um, basically insert and pop elements from both sides. All right, so that was deque. Now the last thing is counter, and counter is basically it's useful for basically counting, like the word says. So it's used for rapid tallies of quantities. So let's say I have an array or a list that has these elements, and I create my counter, which basically takes in this thing, and let's print out counter. So what counter does is it creates a hash table of each element where the key is each element and the value is how the instances, so the count of each element. So when I run it, um, so I need to, let's see, oh, that's the error that I made. I need to print this out. So when I run it, you can see this counter, it tells me A is 1, B is 1, C is 1. So if I replace this C with an A and I run it again, I get A is 2 and B is 1. And I can always access things by specifying the key. What's the count of A? And it tells me 2. Now let's say if I say, what's the count of D? It's not present, so it gives me 0. So these are basically so these things of course you can implement on your own, but then these are pre-built into Python, so it's just good to make use of these optimized implementations. So that's about it for this video, and I hope you found it useful. And also please check out the other videos in this series, and the code for this would be uploaded on my GitHub page, and the link for that would be below. So see you guys the next time.